Subscribe. Like. Comment. Because what happens after the lights go out ain't meant for the public, and once you hear it, you won't forget it. The call came in at 1:43 a.m. Officer down, the dispatcher's voice crackled. HNP. East Wing. Detective Lena Cross was already dressed. She'd learned that prisons never slept. They only pretended to. What happened inside their walls after midnight rarely made it into official reports. Horizon North Penitentiary stood at the edge of the city like a concrete island, surrounded by a thick blanket of fog and harsh floodlights. From a distance, it looked calm, almost peaceful. But Cross knew better. By the time she reached the East Wing, guards had formed a tight, silent circle near the base of a stairwell. No one spoke. No one moved. On the wall above the steps, written in thick black marker, was a single, chilling word: quiet. Below it lay Officer Raymond Pike. He wasn't injured in a riot. He wasn't attacked in a brawl. He had just collapsed, mid-patrol, his radio still clipped to his belt, flashlight resting near his hand as if he simply dropped it while trying to understand what he was seeing. The medic shook his head, his face grim. No signs of struggle, he said quietly. No visible cause. Cross stared at the message on the wall. Who wrote that? Silence. No one answered. Warden Samuel Hale arrived moments later, his expression composed, calm, dressed like a man used to managing chaos. This is a tragic loss, he said, his voice even. But I assure you, Detective, nothing criminal occurred here. Cross turned to him slowly, her eyes narrowed. Your officer dies on duty, under a message that looks like a warning, and you're telling me nothing happened. Hale folded his hands behind his back. Prisons are emotional places. Detective. Inmates leave marks. They provoke. Cross crouched, studying the handwriting. Clean strokes. Deliberate. This wasn't a random scrawl. It wasn't written in panic. Someone wanted this scene, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Raymond Pike had been a quiet man. Married, 2 kids, no known enemies inside or out. But when Cross reviewed his recent activity logs, something stood out. 3 nights in a row, Pike had been reassigned to late patrols in restricted corridors, areas that didn't officially exist on public maps of the prison. Storage zones. Old maintenance wings. Service tunnels that were supposedly sealed decades ago. Or so the official records claimed. She requested the security footage from those areas. The response came back almost immediately. Unavailable. System upgrade. Every single corridor Pike had walked that night had gone dark at the exact same time. It was too precise to be a coincidence. HNP marketed itself as a model institution. Its website was filled with photos of airy halls, education programs, and impressive rehabilitation statistics. International delegations toured its facilities. Journalists praised its transparency. But Cross had worked enough cases to know that the cleanest places often hid the deepest rot. She asked for a list of inmates housed near the east stairwell. One name caught her eye. Evan Reed, 26 years old, convicted of manslaughter after a bar fight ended in tragedy. His sentence was 12 years. He had no gang ties, no history of violence inside the prison. But his file showed something strange. He'd submitted 3 grievances in the last month. All were flagged. All were marked resolved. Yet none of the forms contained any resolution. They were just empty. Cross requested to speak with him. A guard hesitated, shifting his weight. Inmate Reed has been relocated. Where? Administrative review. Which unit is that? Another uncomfortable pause. It's not listed, Detective. Cross felt a cold chill run down her spine. In a place defined by meticulous records, anything not listed might as well not exist. That afternoon, a small, independent news site published a short article. Local journalist dies in custody. Marcus Vale, a former investigative reporter, an inmate at HNP. The official cause of death was listed as a medical episode. But Cross recognized the name. Vale had been investigating corporate corruption before his conviction, and he'd been asking questions about Horizon North from the inside. Now, 2 men were dead, both under suspicious circumstances, inside a prison that insisted nothing was wrong. The word on the wall echoed in her mind. Quiet. It wasn't just a message. It was an order. Years ago, I wrote exposés. I uncovered shady deals in privatized detention contracts, tracked missing funds, and exposed unregistered companies operating deep within correctional systems. But this was different. Evan Reed, a missing inmate. I requested his file. What I got was a skeleton. Large sections were missing, redacted, or just deleted. But at the bottom of the last page, a single handwritten note, "Ask about after dark." So, I did. I stayed. I sat in my car, just beyond the outer gate, watching floodlights sweep over concrete and steel. The prison settled into its nocturnal rhythm, the distant clang of doors, low voices on the wind, the constant hum of generators. And then, at 7 minutes past midnight, a white service van appeared. No logo, no unit number, just a laminated badge on the dashboard. It wasn't on any schedule I'd seen. 2 minutes later, the lights in one specific wing flickered, and then went dark. Just that one section. That was my cue. I started my engine. Inside, the corridors felt alien after midnight. The usual noise, the restless energy of hundreds of inmates, was gone. It was silent. Doors were locked tight. Guards, who usually patrolled alone, now stood in pairs. I passed a junior officer I'd spoken with earlier. I kept my voice low. "Where do inmates go after lights out?" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Somewhere," he whispered, "they don't come back from." I followed the dim emergency lighting down a narrow passage hidden behind the medical wing. The walls here were older, unpainted, marked with faded numbers. At the very end stood a heavy door labeled, "Compliance, authorized personnel only." I reached for the handle. Locked. But from behind it, I heard movement. Not loud, but controlled, measured. As I stepped back, my eyes caught something on the floor. A folded orange uniform shirt. It was still warm. Stitched on the chest was a number. Evan Reed. My radio crackled to life. "Detective, you need to return to the main corridor." I ignored it. Crouching down, I unfolded the shirt. Tucked inside the pocket was a scrap of paper. On it, one line, written in the same careful script I'd seen on a stairwell wall earlier: "If we talk, we disappear." The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. Multiple sets, steady and approaching. I rose slowly and turned. 3 guards stood at the end of the passage. They weren't hostile, not exactly friendly either. They were just watching. "You're in a restricted area," one of them said, his voice eerily calm. I held up the shirt. "This belongs to an inmate who no longer exists on your roster." The silence was heavy. Another guard spoke, his tone almost gentle. "It's for your own safety, detective." "Whose safety?" I shot back. None of them answered. Instead, they stepped aside, creating a path for me to leave. It was an invitation, but it felt like a command. I took one last look at that locked door. Behind it, something moved again. A chair scraped softly against the floor. A voice whispered a single, muffled word, then stopped. I turned and walked back toward the light, the weight of the shirt heavy in my hands. Behind me, I heard the door to the main corridor click shut. And I knew, somewhere deep inside Horizon North Penitentiary, someone was erasing another name. By the time I reached the exit, the cold truth had settled in my gut. This wasn't about discipline or maintaining order. This was about silence. A silence this prison was willing to protect at any cost. My investigation wasn't just about a missing person anymore. It was about uncovering what they were hiding in the dark, and what happened to those who dared to speak. And I wasn't leaving until I had answers. Thanks for watching. If you're intrigued by dark mysteries like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Detective Lena Cross didn't leave HNP that night. She sat in her car just beyond the gates, the folded orange shirt on the passenger seat like a silent witness. Evan Reed's number stared back at her from the fabric. A man reduced to cloth and ink. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, her vigil paid off. The same white service van she'd seen before rolled out of a side entrance. Empty. Cross followed, keeping her distance, her headlights off. The van drove past the silent industrial zone, beyond the city limits, and into a forgotten cluster of warehouses officially listed as correction storage. The driver, a silhouette in the dim light, scanned a badge and disappeared inside one of the sprawling, windowless buildings. Cross parked a block away, killed the engine, and waited. An hour later, when the van re-emerged, its back doors were sealed shut. No markings. No escort. just quiet efficiency as it pulled away. By morning, it was as if Evan Reed had never existed. His name had vanished from every internal system at HNP. His cell was already reassigned. His commissary account closed. His entire disciplinary history deleted. It was a digital ghosting, a bureaucratic erasure. Cross walked straight into Warden Hale's office and confronted him. "You erased him," she said, her voice flat. Hale remained unnervingly calm, his hands steepled on his desk. "We follow procedure, detective. Procedure doesn't delete human beings from existence." He met her gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Detective, you're tired. You're chasing shadows." She slid the folded orange shirt across his polished desk. "You forgot to delete this." For a split second, Hale's composure cracked. His eyes flickered down to the shirt, then back up. He pushed it back toward her. "That's evidence. File it accordingly." Cross leaned forward, her voice a low whisper. "Where do the inmates go after dark?" Hale's voice dropped, losing all its professional warmth. "You don't want to know." But she already had a lead. The Boston newsroom had returned her call. They'd recovered the last unsent draft from the tablet of the murdered journalist, Marcus Vale. It wasn't an article. It was a map. Coordinates. Warehouse numbers. Vehicle schedules. And a chilling title, HNP After Dark. Below it, a single, terrifying paragraph. "They don't move us to other cells. They move us to other lives. Paperwork erases us first. Then the building finishes the job. It's cleaner than punishment. It's quieter than death." Marcus had known, and someone had made sure he could never publish it. Cross knew she couldn't trust anyone inside the system. She assembled a small, off-the-books team. Ryan Holt, a straight-laced federal auditor who owed her a favor. Maya Chen, a digital forensics expert who could pull ghosts from the machine. And a retired corrections captain who left HNP under a vague medical retirement 2 years earlier. Jonah Reed, Evan's uncle. He didn't cry when Cross told him his nephew was missing. He just nodded slowly, a deep, weary resignation in his eyes. "They told me he was transferred," Jonah said, his voice rough. "No address. No facility. Just gone." He opened an old, worn folder. Inside were copies of unsigned contracts between HNP and a private logistics company called Blackwater North Solutions. On paper, it handled behavioral relocation and compliance services. In reality, it operated the warehouses. "Those buildings aren't for storage," Jonah said, his finger tapping a faded blueprint. "They are off-grid holding centers. No oversight. No public records. Inmates go in and become numbers on a private spreadsheet." "Why?" Cross asked, the word hanging in the air. Jonah's voice tightened with a lifetime of buried anger. "Because lawsuits are expensive. Appeals take time. Some inmates, detective, some inmates cost the system more alive than gone." That night, Cross and Holt returned to the warehouse district. They didn't go near the main gate. Instead, they watched from a distance as Maya worked her magic, accessing traffic cameras and cloned badge logs remotely. The pattern was undeniable. 2 vans entered the facility every night between midnight and 2 a.m. Always empty when they went in. Always leaving sealed. Then, Maya found something. She froze a frame from a high-angle traffic cam, catching a faint reflection in a grimy second-story window of the main building. She zoomed in, filtering the image. Inside, rows of bunks, the unmistakable color of orange fabric. Movement. "They're keeping them," Maya whispered through their comms, her voice laced with disbelief. "They're not transferring them at all. They're warehousing them." Holt clenched his jaw, the muscle ticking. Off-books incarceration. Cross shook her head, the full, horrifying picture finally coming into focus. "Worse," she said. "It's erasure." Inside H&P, things tightened fast. Suddenly, guards stopped answering my questions. Doors would slam shut just as I approached. My access badge failed, not once, but twice. Then, a note appeared on my windshield, a clear warning: "This isn't your case." I ignored it, but the prison didn't. At 1:09 a.m., the same white van I'd seen before returned. This time, I was ready. I slipped inside HNP through a service gate, using an old set of credentials from a retired colleague. The corridors were dim, almost dark, with only the faint glow of emergency strips along the floor to guide me. I finally reached the compliance corridor. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, but the room was completely empty. No uniforms. No papers. Nothing. Just faint scuff marks on the floor and a new, chilling message scrawled on the wall. You heard enough. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, when I heard the faint sound of voices coming from deeper within the facility. I followed the sound to a stairwell I'd never seen before, one that wasn't on any of the official prison maps. As I descended, the air grew colder. The stairs opened into a long corridor and then into a wide, brightly lit room. Fluorescent panels on the ceiling cast a harsh glare over rows of metal bunks lining the walls. And the bunks were occupied. Men sat quietly, some reading, some just staring into space, others lying completely motionless. They were all wearing plain orange jumpsuits, but with no inmate numbers, no names. Then, one of them looked up. My blood ran cold. It was Evan Reed, a man officially declared dead months ago. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Detective," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I started to step forward, but a loud voice boomed from behind me. "Don't." Suddenly, guards emerged from both ends of the corridor. They weren't running or shouting, just closing in with a calm, unnerving certainty. "This is a controlled zone," one of them said, his voice flat. "You're trespassing." I stood my ground. "These people are unregistered inmates," I shot back. "This is completely illegal." Another guard just shook his head slowly. "They're not inmates." A chill went down my spine. "Then what are they?" He hesitated for just a second before answering. "Assets." I backed away slowly, my mind racing. They didn't touch me. They didn't have to. I left with my heart hammering against my ribs, knowing I had just crossed a line they could no longer ignore. The very next morning, everything imploded. The federal auditor's office was raided. Computers were seized, files confiscated. My ally, Holt, was suspended, pending an official review. My tech expert, Maya, had her system access completely terminated. Then, my phone rang, an unknown number. A distorted voice on the other end said, "You saw what we wanted you to see. Now leave it." "People are disappearing," I replied, my voice shaking with anger. The voice was cold, detached. "They are being resolved." And then the line went dead. The next morning, a body was found outside the old warehouse. Not hidden inside, but left right out in the open, where the entire city would see it. It was a guard, the partner of an officer I'd questioned. A note lay beside him, with two simple words, "Quiet failed." This was no longer a warning. It was a declaration of war. In that moment, I understood something truly terrifying. The system, this shadow organization, wasn't hiding anymore. It was escalating. The silence had been broken, and now, someone intended to restore it by any means necessary, no matter who stood in their way. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Thanks for watching. If you want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss it. The city woke to sirens and headlines. A guard was found dead near an unmarked warehouse, and a message was left in plain sight. Suddenly, HNP After Dark wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a full-blown crisis. Detective Lena Cross stood in a federal field office, her eyes fixed on a wall of screens. The footage looped endlessly, traffic cameras, drones, satellite feeds all focused on the warehouses. Outside, unmarked vehicles swarmed the area. Agents moved in tight, silent formations, sealing every possible entrance. Inside HNP, the system was imploding. Chaos rippled through the ranks. Guards started calling in sick, refusing to show up for their shifts. Supervisors wouldn't sign off on orders. The very silence that had once protected HNP, that had allowed it to operate in the shadows, had now become its greatest weakness. The chain of command was broken. Warden Hale resigned at noon. Just like that. By evening, he was gone. No forwarding address, no official statement. He simply vanished. But Cross knew better than to celebrate. Systems like this don't just collapse in broad daylight. They retreat. They regroup. They adapt. Later, she sat across from Evan Reed in a temporary federal holding room. He looked thinner, older, but there was a clarity in his eyes she hadn't seen before. He was one of the lucky ones, a survivor. They told us we were being reassigned, Evan said, his voice quiet but steady. They called it a chance to start over. No more records, no more labels. A clean slate. And what happened when people refused? Cross asked, leaning forward. Evan's expression darkened. They stopped asking. Cross held his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. Why you? Why were you chosen? He hesitated for a moment, the memory still raw. Because I filed an appeal. My case was gaining momentum, getting attention. They told me I cost too much. He swallowed hard. They said some people are cheaper to erase. That single sentence hung in the air, chilling and absolute. Cheaper to erase. The task force worked around the clock, and within 48 hours, they had uncovered the entire operation. The front company, Blackwater North Solutions, was a complete sham. Its directors didn't exist, their names fabricated. The funding was a complex maze, routed through obscure state contracts and something called behavioral compliance grants. A disturbing pattern emerged with every inmate who had been erased. It always started with legal pressure, media interest, or uncomfortable questions being asked. Then, they would disappear. But they weren't killed. It was something far worse. They were removed from existence. They were no longer prisoners. They were unpeople. Wiped from every database, every record, as if they had never been born. Cross testified before a closed federal panel. She laid out everything she knew, the secret tunnels, the off-book prison wings, the remote warehouses, and the chilling efficiency of the digital erasure. She ended her testimony with a single, powerful sentence. Justice that hides is no longer justice. The arrests started immediately after. Administrators, contract liaisons, regional directors. They even brought in a state oversight official whose signature was on the very first authorization for the program. The net was closing. But Warden Hale remained missing. And so did the true architects of the system, the powerful figures who operated even further up the chain, hidden from view. The investigation had cracked the foundation, but the fight was far from over. The real masterminds were still out there, in the shadows, waiting. Thanks for watching. If you were captivated by this story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. See you in the next one. Just 3 weeks. That's all it took. In 3 weeks, the warehouses were completely cleared out. Every single person who had been detained, every person who had been made to disappear, was transferred to verified federal custody. Their names were restored. Their files were painstakingly rebuilt. And most importantly, their families were notified. Imagine that phone call. For the first time in years, men who had been systematically erased were finally allowed to exist again. I remember watching Evan as he stood in the sunlight for the first time since he was taken. He just closed his eyes, soaking it in. He whispered, "I thought I was gone forever." And Cross, who had been instrumental in all of this, simply nodded. "They wanted you to believe that," she said. The story exploded. It didn't just stay local, it went global. HNP After Dark became a massive headline in Europe, in Canada, and all across the United States. It was the story everyone was talking about. This exposure triggered a chain reaction. Official investigations started popping up in other states. Suddenly, prisons that had once been praised for their so-called efficiency went quiet. A little too quiet, if you ask me. It was the kind of silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Cross thought she had won. She thought it was over. But evil is a persistent weed. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, she returned to her office. And there it was. Sitting right in the middle of her desk was a plain envelope. No return address. Her heart must have been pounding as she opened it. Inside, there was just a single page. It was a transfer authorization form. At first glance, it looked different. It had a different company logo, and it was from a different state. But the structure was identical. And then her eyes fell to the bottom, to the small print. A familiar, chilling phrase appeared: behavioral compliance, after hours only. It was happening again. And in the corner, a single word was stamped in bright red ink: quiet. Cross leaned back in her chair, the full weight of the discovery crashing down on her. They had managed to dismantle one operation, one single branch of this monstrous system. But they hadn't dismantled the idea behind it. They hadn't killed the twisted logic or the terrifying belief that some lives are just easier to erase than to defend. These kinds of systems, They don't just die when you expose them. They migrate. They evolve. They learn from their mistakes. And then they wait for their moment. She took a deep breath, picked up the paper, and placed it inside a brand new folder. Across the front, she wrote a new title, After Dark, Continued. Because she knew. Somewhere out there, at that very moment, another facility was dimming its lights. Another unmarked van was rolling down a dark road, its journey unrecorded. And another person's name was being quietly, systematically removed from the world. Cross stood up and switched off her office light, plunging the room into darkness. But this time, the darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a map. Because now, she knew exactly where to look. And if you think this story was intense, you are not ready for what's coming next. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because you won't want to miss it. Stay close.